Alright, so this is the next thing we're going to do in Unit 2. I wouldn't so much call it notes as much as it is a chart. That's what we call it, a chart. It's an angle relationships chart. It's another very useful piece of information that we're going to do today. It's going to carry us through the year. I know I say that about all the notes that we do lately, but to be honest with you, like everything that we do in these first couple units kind of builds what we need to know for the rest of the year of geometry. So I mean, these terms that I teach you today, these angle relationships, I'm going to be mentioning all the way throughout the year. Alright, so make sure you're paying attention. It should go pretty fast too. So alright, so these are angle relationships. These are not all of them, but these are the main ones. The first one, vertical angles. Two angles across from each other on intersecting lines. They are always congruent. So an example of vertical angles. If I draw a set of intersecting lines here, just creating a little X. If I draw a set of intersecting lines, and then I number, say, this angle 1 and this angle right here 2. These are the angles they're talking about that are vertical angles. You can kind of tell just by looking at it. The two angles across from each other on intersecting lines, and they're congruent. You can kind of see that from this one, that these two angles are congruent. Angle 1 looks to be the same size as angle 2. And then the other two angles on top and bottom will be vertical as well, but they wouldn't be the same as angle 1 and 2. They'll be different. So I'll mark those with 2 markings, just to indicate they're congruent to each other, but they're not congruent to angle 1 and 2. I'm showing it to you another way. I'm going to draw another set of lines, a little thinner. So on this one, say my angle 1 and 2 are right here. You can tell even more than the way I drew these that these two are congruent to each other here and here. So the two angles that are across from each other are called vertical angles, and they'll be congruent. Next one, adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are two angles that sit next to each other and share a common side. We talked about adjacent a little bit already too, but I want to show you what they look like. So first I'm going to draw an acute triangle, acute angle, I'm sorry, we're not into triangles yet. I'm going to draw an acute angle here, and then I'm going to draw a ray down the middle of it. It doesn't have to bisect or anything, I just want to draw one in there. So that being said, we do that, then I number those two angles. These two angles will be considered adjacent angles. Why? Because they sit next to each other. It's two angles that share a common side, which would be this side in the middle right here, and they sit next to each other. Another way to look at it too, say if you had a straight line, you know, in there, on a straight line, you had two angles, an angle right here and an angle here. You had a straight line, and you got angle 1 and angle 2. These are still considered adjacent angles because they share this common side right here. With a straight angle. Alright. The next one, complementary angles. And I mentioned this to y'all before when we did that little always, sometimes, and never chart. The word complementary and supplementary kept popping up, and I told you we would get to it. Here we are today. We're going to learn it today. So this isn't complimentary like giving somebody a compliment, because I know some of y'all might think, oh, that's spelled a little wrong, because the one with compliment is spelled with an I in it. No, this is geometry term complementary. Means something else. Alright, so complementary angles, any two angles whose sum is 90 degrees. So complementary angles are any two angles whose sum is 90 degrees. The most obvious way you'll see it, since the two angles have to add up to 90, you'll see a right triangle. I keep saying triangle today. You'll see a right angle, and then inside of that right angle, they'll have two smaller angles, like this. So you see a right angle, and then they'll have a ray come in, and then you'll have an angle here that may be 30 degrees, and then this angle may be 60 degrees. If that's the case, 30 plus 60 is 90. So these are two angles whose sum is 90 degrees. These are complementary angles. Now, they don't always have to be like these, which are adjacent. Since these sit side by side, these are adjacent. They don't always have to be adjacent, though. They don't even have to be connected. You can just have two random angles that you're comparing that are not even connected to each other. So you have one angle here, and then you just have another angle somewhere just further away from it. And so you'd say this angle is 25 degrees. If that's the case, this angle is 65 degrees. You add those two together, you're like, okay, I'm comparing these two angles. Are they complementary? You add them together, 25 plus 65, you get 90. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, these are complementary angles. So these are two different examples of what complementary angles can look like. They can either be attached to each other, or they can be just two angles that you're comparing. They don't have to necessarily sit side by side. Moving on. Next one, supplementary. Supplementary angles. Any two angles whose sum is 180. So complementary was 90. Supplementary is 180. This is any two angles whose sum adds up to 180. So when I add the two angles together, they add up to 180. And they're supplementary. So supplementary angles. The most common way you'll see these is on a straight line or a straight angle, and then like I drew it there before, there'll be a ray coming out of it, creating the two angles here. So these two will be supplementary, because I know since they form a straight line, they have to add up to 180. Even though I don't know the value of these two, I know since they form a straight line right here, they have to add up to 180 degrees. So I can just look at this and say, okay, angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary because they form a line. And they're also adjacent because they sit side by side. But like I told you on the last problem, two angles don't have to sit next to each other to be supplementary. For example, you can have obtuse angle and then you can have an acute angle somewhere else. Draw it here, I guess. An obtuse angle could equal, let's say 110. The acute angle could equal 70. If you compare those two, you're like, okay, 110 plus 70 is 180. So then that means these two are supplementary to each other. Supplementary angles. Last one. Save this one for last for a reason. It's called a linear pair. Linear pair, two angles that are adjacent and supplementary. They form a straight line. So this one, linear pair, takes on two of the terms we already talked about. They mention adjacent and they mention supplementary here. Since they mention those, we go back to adjacent. Adjacent said two angles that are next to each other and have a common side. And supplementary says the sum is 180. So for it to be a linear pair, it has to be both of those qualifications. So they're going to form a line, a straight angle, and then they have to sit side by side, angle 1 and angle 2. This is what a linear pair look like. So a linear pair now, and this is why I tell my kids all the time, this is something you need to know. So a linear pair will always be supplementary. But in reverse of that, if you look back down here, supplementary angles will not always be a linear pair. If the two angles that you're talking about are not connected and adjacent and don't form a line, then they won't be a linear pair. But anytime we talk about a linear pair, they'll always be supplementary. But in reverse, a supplementary angle won't always be a linear pair. So you just need to understand that part of it. And the other thing, since I know this is a linear pair, I could write an expression based on this. I could say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. That's going to help us later too. Now let's go back down here and do that for complementary too. So we could have said that same thing down here for the supplementary ones that were together. We could write that equation. This will help us later. Measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. Every time I think of something, I like to add it in. And on this one, since these two are connected, if you see it like this, say the degrees weren't there. Should do that in another color. Let's do it green. So you got a 1 and a 2 here. In that case, same situation, but this is complementary. So the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 90 degrees in this situation. This is going to help us when we get ready to write equations. Understanding that concept about complementary and supplementary. Alright, let's go to the back. On the back, let's identify the types of angles, check all the relationships between angle 1 and 2. So all you're doing is using what we did on the front, the chart, and deciding what relationships you see between each one of these 1 through 6. So starting out on number 1, and obviously you know I'm going to come to y'all for help. Number 1, looking at these, we're going to check everything that applies for these angle relationships. On number 1, alright, anybody. So good. On this one, the only thing we should have checked was vertical, because they're not adjacent, they're not complementary because we don't know what the measure of these two are, and we can't assume. They're not supplementary, we don't know the measure, we can't assume. And then they're not a linear pair, they don't form a line. Alright, so number 2, we're looking at the relationship between 1 and 2 and checking all that apply. Anybody for this one? Alright, so going down the list on this one. They do qualify for adjacent because they sit side by side. They're not vertical, it can't be adjacent and vertical. They do qualify for complementary because if you look, right angle over here, that means on this other side, between these two angles, it should be 90 degrees as well. They are complementary. If they're complementary, then they can't be supplementary, so you can skip that. And then the last thing, a linear pair. You're asking yourself, do angles 1 and 2 form a line? No, they don't. Now, angles 1, 2, and this right angle, yeah, all that forms a line, but that's not what we're looking at. We're trying to talk about a relationship between angle 1 and angle 2. So this one's just adjacent and complementary. Number 3, let me get somebody for that one. Okay, on number 3, we got definitely adjacent. They sit side by side. If they're adjacent, they can't be vertical. They're complementary. No, they don't form a right angle, so no. And they don't give us any to measure, so we can't assume what they are. Supplementary. On this one, you can check this because you see they form a line here, so they have to add up to 180. So 1 and 2 are supplementary. And then we talked about it. If they supplementary and they form a line, then yes, they are going to be a linear pair as well. Number 4, looking at this one next. Let me get somebody to volunteer for this. So on number 4, we definitely should have picked adjacent. Once again, if they're adjacent, they can't be vertical. Then after that, this is where a lot of people try to get mixed up. A lot of people like to tell me complementary on here, but how do you know? Y'all think this is a right angle. They didn't tell you that. I told you that we show you when it's a right angle. You can't assume anything. This is not a right angle. It looks actually a little bit bigger than 90 degrees. So it's not complementary. They're not supplementary either. And if they ain't supplementary, then they can't be a linear pair. So the only thing these are adjacent angles. Don't assume anything. A lot of kids like to pick complementary on this one. No. You use information given. Don't assume anything. Number 5, let me get somebody for that. Alright, so this one a little bit tricky. From your eye, you see adjacent, and you know that's not it. They're not next to each other, but they are vertical. They're across from each other. And then complementary, most people will say no to this. But if you look at how this is set up in here, they're showing you all this for a reason. So they're showing you a right angle box here. So you know there's right angles all the way around in this one. Right angle in here, and then right angle in here, and then right angle up here. And then if you look, inside of that they had the little marking showing congruent and congruent. That means that this coming through right here was a bisector. So I split this in half, 45 and 45 in here. And we've done this already. We did this the other day in the notes, so y'all should be familiar with that. If that's the case, if angle 1 is 45, angle 2 also has to be what? Yeah, 45. And if that's going to be the case, you remember, you know what complementary means. Complementary means two angles that add up to 90 degrees. Angle 1 and angle 2, do they add up to 90 degrees? They don't have to be next to each other. Yes, they do. So complementary should be checked off on this one. Right. Supplementary, no. Linear pair, no. Last one. Number 6. Let me get somebody that finishes off strong. Alright, so on this one, starting out, we know they're not adjacent. They are vertical. They sit across from each other. So that means they're congruent. And then after that, complementary, that means they both have to add up 90. Well, let's just talk about them being congruent first, and that'll help us decide the rest of this. So these two angles are congruent, angle 1 and 2. Over here, they give you the right angle box showing you that these lines are perpendicular. That's the case. That means you got all right angles in here. Right angle here, right angle here, right angle here. So all these angles are 90 degrees, right? 90, 90, 90, 90. But we're only comparing angle 1 and 2. That's the case. Angle 1 and 2 are both 90. So are they complementary? No. Angle 1 and 2 are both 90. Add those together gives you 180. They are supplementary. Now, supplementary, are they a linear pair? No, because they don't form a line. So this is how you're going to have to think about your angle relationships and be able to answer questions based off of it, alright? You have to be able to see what you can check off, what you can't. Sometimes you can check off multiple things. Sometimes you can only check off one thing. You have to be able to make that decision, alright? So this is a quick set of notes. We're going to practice on this stuff, make ourselves better. Like I said, and like I always say, if your notes went too fast for you, go back, slow down, watch it, pause, get what you need from it, and make sure you get this material. Alright, have complete notes. Alright, thank you.